Marcus Bell bought 2 coffees every morning and drank only one. He had done it for 6 years. 2 cups from the all-night cart outside Riverbend General, 1.85 each when he started, 2 cents by the spring it ended. 1 cup he drank, the other he set down on the empty half of a bench at Hawthorne Landing, where the Monongahela went gray and then gold, and he waited for an old man in a brown coat who never once told him his name. The thermos the old man carried was dented green enamel, the kind that sold for $4 at a hardware store 40 years ago. 2 letters were filed into the base, so worn you had to tilt it to the light to read them. E.B. The old man held it in both hands every morning and almost never opened it. Marcus thought it was junk. He thought the man was nobody. He was wrong by about $2.4 billion. On a Tuesday in the second week of October, 11 months after the old man stopped coming, Marcus would climb the hill to the bench and find a small brass plate bolted to the middle slat and a name on it, and 3 black cars idling along the river road. The men who got out of them had been looking for him for 41 days. What that name set loose would unbury a debt no one had recorded, rebuild a man who had not slept a full night in 19 years, and crack open a family that had spent 2 decades pretending it had nothing left to lose. But that was later. First, there were 6 years of 2 coffees and a man who never asked a single question worth more than the weather. Marcus was 58 years old. He cleaned floors. His title at Riverbend General was Environmental Services Technician 2, which paid $15.40 an hour, 23 cents after midnight on the differential, and which meant he pushed a yellow mop bucket down the same 4 corridors of the 4th floor from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights on, 2 off. He had done it for 16 years. He knew where the floor dipped outside room 412 so the water pooled. He knew the third light from the elevator buzzed when the heat. He knew which patients were dying, usually before the charts did, because he had learned over 16 years what the room sounded like when it was about to. His shoes were New Balance gray, bought for $39.99 on a clearance rack. Resoled twice by a man who shops at 2 doors down from the barber on Brownsville Road, where Marcus had gotten his hair cut since he was a boy, and where the same 3 old men had been arguing about the Steelers since before the second Super Bowl. The man charged $12 for a resole and did honest work. Marcus's apartment was 1 room and a half on the 2nd floor of a building on the far side of the river, $610 a month, where the radiator knocked like someone wanting in. He kept it at 64 degrees in winter to save on gas. He owned 4 shirts, 2 of them the same gray. He ate the same thing most days: oatmeal and a banana before the bus, a sandwich at 3 a.m. In the staff break room that he made himself the night before, turkey and 1 slice of cheese, wrapped in the same wax paper folded twice, bought from the corner store where the man behind the counter still called him young man, which neither of them believed. The math of his life was simple and he ran it constantly, the way some men hum. Bus fare was $2.75 each way, and 50s a day, $27.50 a week, which was why he walked the 41 minutes home when the weather allowed and rode only the inbound. Rent, gas, electric, the phone he kept for $20 a month, the small standing payment to a funeral home he would not finish until he was 61. Whatever was left, and it was never much, went into a coffee can on top of the refrigerator, and the coffee can was not for him. His wife had been Dora. She had been a school cafeteria worker for 29 years, the kind of woman who knew which children were not eating at home and made sure their trays were heavier, and she had sung the alto line in the choir at the church up on the hill every Sunday of her life, and made a sweet potato pie that had no recipe written down anywhere, and never would. She had fed half of Homewood one way or another, off the books, and she had died 4 years and 7 months before the morning the old man stopped coming, pancreatic. From the day a doctor at Riverbend said the word to the day Marcus carried her wedding ring home in a small plastic bag was 91 days. He had cleaned the floors of the very hospital where she lay dying, 4 floors up from her, on his shift, and on his unpaid lunch he had gone and sat with her, and when she could no longer talk he had kept talking, low, about nothing, about the buzzing light and the dip outside 412, because his mother had taught him that the talking was not the point. His mother had been a home aide for the dying, back in a time before there was a word like hospice that people used in commercials. She had come up from Georgia as a girl. In the years the northbound trains were full of people leaving the south for the river towns, and she had raised him alone in 2 rooms in Homewood and taken him on her rounds, when there was no one to watch him, 8 years old, sitting in the corner of a stranger's bedroom while his mother washed the feet of a man who would be dead by Thursday, and hummed the old hymns under her breath while she did it. He had asked her once, walking home, what she actually did all day, because it did not look like a job. "You sit with people," she said. "That's the whole job, baby. You just sit with them so they're not by themselves at the worst part. Everything else just keeping busy with your hands so they don't feel watched. You don't stand over folks." She said it the way other mothers said be home before dark. He had not understood it for 30 years, and then he had understood it all at once on the 91st day, holding a plastic bag. So this is what Marcus Bell did that nobody saw. That was on no chart and no schedule and no one's idea of his job. On the 4th floor of Riverbend General there were always 2 or 3 patients who got no visitors. Not few visitors, none. The nurses knew them by the silence of their phones. There was an old woman in 419 named Estelle who had outlived a husband, 2 sons and a sister, and whose only daughter lived in Arizona and called the desk twice a month to ask if her mother had died yet. In those words, there was a man in 406, a retired bus mechanic, whose family was 3 hours away and angry about something nobody at the hospital would ever know. Marcus mopped their rooms last. He took the extra 4 or 5 minutes he was not paid for and he wiped down a windowsill that did not need it, slow, and while he did it he talked about the weather, about the Pirates losing, which they reliably did, about the dip outside 412. He did not hold their hands, because that was not his to offer and he knew the difference. He just stayed in the room a little longer than the floor required, with his hands busy, so that at 3 in the morning, the worst part, they were not entirely by themselves. He never told anyone he did this. When a new charge nurse once thanked him for spending time with Estelle, he said he was behind on the floor and changed the subject, and he was not behind, and he made sure he was the next night so it would be true. The coffee can on the refrigerator was the other thing nobody knew. Whatever was left at the end of a month, the $11, the $23, once a whole $40 in a good month with overtime, went into the can, and the can went back out into the world in ways Marcus kept track of in his head and wrote down nowhere. The cartman's daughter needed $60 for a field trip the cartman was too proud to mention twice. The money was in an envelope under the napkins the next morning, and the cartman never knew who, or pretended not to. A younger janitor, Reyes, 2 kids and a car that died in February, found 4 20s folded inside his locker and asked the whole floor about it for a week, and Marcus shrugged with everyone else. Dora had run her life the same way for 29 years, heavier trays for the children who needed them, and she had never once said a word about which children. And Marcus had married a woman who understood without being told that the giving stopped being worth anything the moment you let it be seen. You sit with people, his mother said. You don't stand over them. He had buried his wife on a Saturday and gone back to work on the Monday. People thought that was hard. It was the opposite. Work was the only place where he still knew what to do with his hands. There was a small monthly payment he would owe a funeral home on Route 51 until he turned 61, $58 a month for 31 more months. The cost of having done right by Dora in a single plot with a stone that said beloved and room beneath it that he had already paid for, because he was not going to leave that arithmetic for anyone else to solve. He did the math on that too walking home. 31 months. Then it would be done and he would be 61, and the floors would still need cleaning. And that was as far as Marcus Bell let himself plan. The bench came after. Hawthorne Landing was not a real park. It was a wedge of city land where an old coal pier had been torn out, fenced on 2 sides, with a strip of cracked asphalt path, 4 trees the city had planted and forgotten, and 1 bench facing the water, green slats on a black iron frame bolted to a concrete pad. From it you could watch the river and, across the river, the lights of the freight terminal, the long low buildings and the cranes and the line of barges, and behind that the city. At 5:40 in the morning, between the end of his shift and the start of the rest of his life, it was the one place Marcus had found where nobody needed anything from him and he needed nothing back. The walk from the hospital was 26 minutes. He had timed it. He had started going there in the worst of it, the winter after Dora, when the apartment at 64 degrees with the knocking radiator was a thing he could not make himself walk into at 7 a.m. He would buy a coffee from the cart, climb the hill to the landing and watch the water turn from gray to gold, and around 6:15 he would feel able to go home. That was all it was at first. 1 coffee, 1 man on a bench. He did not know yet that grief had a way of finding its own kind in the dark, down by a cold river, before the sun. He did not know that 20 feet from where he sat 6 winters back, on a morning the radio said was 34 degrees, there was already an old man on that bench who had been there since 2 in the morning, and who was by the time Marcus walked up the hill at 20 to 6, dying very quietly of the cold. The old man's name, though Marcus would not learn it for 6 years and would not believe it when he did, was Theodore Banks. There are men whose poverty you can read in their hands and men whose wealth you cannot read at all, and Theodore was the second kind on purpose. He was 73 years old that first winter. He was worth, on paper, somewhere north of $2.4 billion, most of it in a privately held freight company that he had built out of 1 rusted-out tugboat and a marine diesel he rebuilt himself in a rented slip in 1971. He had come up with nothing, in the way that word gets used by men who later have everything. His own father, Otis, had come up from Alabama with $40 folded into the lining of a coat, on a train going north with half the county on it, and had worked the river docks in a city that gave a black man the heaviest end of the load and the thinnest end of the pay, loading barges by hand for wages that 2 other men would have split 3 ways. Otis had a single law that he hammered into his only son the way you hammer a rivet until it held. "Nobody give you nothing for free," his father said. "You hear me? Nobody. A man smile at you, you find out what he's after. A man do you a kindness, you find out what it cost because it cost. The ones who say it's free are the most expensive of all. You owe nobody and you let nobody owe you, and that way no one ever owns a piece of you." Otis died at 51 with a back like a question mark and $900 in a savings account, owing no one a cent. And they buried him out of the same church on the hill where he had sat in the back pew for 30 years because that was where the men sat. Theodore had taken the law and the $900 in the rusted tugboat and turned it, across 40 years, into Banks River Freight. 900 employees, a fleet of towboats and barges that moved coal and steel and grain up and down 3 rivers, a glass building downtown with his name on it in letters 4 feet tall. He had done it on his father's law. He trusted contracts and distrusted smiles. He paid every invoice the day it came, and in 40 years, let a single person do him a favor he had not priced and squared. He believed, with the whole iron weight of his life, that kindness was a transaction wearing a coat, and that the only honest thing between 2 people was a number both of them agreed to. And then Elijah. Elijah Banks was Theodore's only son, born when Theodore was already rich enough that the boy would never know the docks, and Theodore had loved him the only way he knew, which was to give him everything and explain nothing. He gave him a $50,000 education and a $90,000 car at 21 and a corner office he had not earned. And what Elijah wanted, what he said at the kitchen table the last winter of his life, was to actually run a boat, a real one, to know the company in his hands and not just on paper. Theodore had been proud and afraid in equal measure, and he had let him. He put Elijah on a towboat called the Verna B as a deckhand for a season, to learn it from the bottom, because that part of the law was true too. You earn the thing or it owns you. On a black March night 19 years before the morning the brass plate appeared. In high water and a fog the captain should not have moved in, a barge broke its coupling on the Monongahela 3 miles below Hawthorne Landing. Elijah went out on the tow to help re-rig it, in a current running faster than anyone had logged that year, and he went into the river between 2 barges in the dark, and they did not find him for 9 days, and they found him a half-mile down from a bench on a wedge of city land that had once been a coal pier. He was 23 years old. Theodore did not cry at the funeral. He stood at the front of the church on the hill in a black coat and shook 400 hands and said, "Thank you," 400 times, and inside the iron law of his life closed over the wound like water over a stone. He had let his son earn the thing, and the thing had taken him. He had loved the boy, and the loving had cost everything, exactly as his father promised it would, the most expensive thing of all. After that Theodore ran the company harder and trusted no one further, and said to anyone who came near him with sympathy, in a voice with no heat in it, that he was fine, that grief was a transaction too, and he had already paid. His wife, Elijah's mother, had left within the year, not in anger, just emptied out, gone to a sister in another state, and Theodore let her go without a fight because fighting would have meant owing her the asking. Her name was Verna, and the towboat had carried it. The glass building got taller, the fleet got bigger, and Theodore Banks, the richest man most people in that city had never heard of, began, without telling anyone, to slip out of his house, before 3 in the morning a few times a month, in a brown coat he kept for nothing else, and drive himself to a wedge of land by the river where he could sit and watch the water that had taken his son, and hold the dented green thermos that had ridden in Elijah's duffel bag onto the Verna B and come back when the boy did not. He never opened it. There was nothing in it. He just held it. 2 letters were filed into the base, faint as a scar. E.B. Elijah had done it himself with a triangular file at 14 at a campsite. The summer Theodore almost took a week off and did not. That was the man on the bench. That was who Marcus Bell, 58, 1540 cents an hour, found slumped sideways at 20 to 6 on a 34-degree morning, the second winter of his own widowhood, not knowing any of it, knowing only one thing, which was the thing the hospital had taught him without ever putting it on a sign. He knew what the cold did to old men. He knew, from 16 years of 4th-floor January admissions, that a body past 70 lost heat faster than it could make it, that the danger started well above freezing, that a person could be killed by a night in the 30s as surely as a night in the teens if they sat still long enough. He knew the early signs the textbooks listed and the nurses confirmed, the slow speech, the fumbling hands, the strange calm, the way a freezing person stopped shivering right when you would think they needed it most and got quiet and almost content, which was the worst sign of all, the body giving up the fight to keep its core warm. He knew you did not pour hot coffee into them, and you did not rub the limbs hard, and you did not let them stand up fast. You got them out of the cold. You warmed the center first, slow. You kept them awake and you kept them talking. So when Marcus came up the path with his single coffee and saw a man in a brown coat sitting too still, head dropped, not shivering, a green thermos loose in two hands that were not gripping it anymore, he did not think rich or poor or stranger. He set his coffee down on the slats and crouched in front of the man and said, the way you say it to a patient, loud and level, Sir, I need you to look at me." The old man's eyes opened. They took a long time to find Marcus's face. When he spoke, his voice came slurred and slow and far away, and what he said, the first words Theodore Banks ever said to the only man who would matter, were, "I'm fine. I don't need anything. Leave me be." Marcus did not leave him be. He got an arm under the old man's shoulders, talking the whole time, low and steady. The dip outside 412, the buzzing light, nonsense, anything, keep him awake. He walked him the 200 yards to the all-night cart where there was a propane heater and a bench inside the plastic siding, and he did not give him the hot coffee but a cup of warm water the cartman heated. And he sat with him under the heater for 40 minutes, while the slow speech sped back up and the hands remembered how to grip, and the color came back into a face that had been going the gray of the river. He did not call an ambulance because the man recovering refused it with a flat finality that Marcus recognized from 16 years of proud old men, and because by 6:40 the danger had passed and the choice was the man's to make. He walked him to the man's own car, a plain dark sedan, 10 years old, nothing on it. And he did not register that it was the only car in the lot worth more than everything Marcus owned, because it did not look it, because Theodore had bought it to not look it. At the car the old man turned. He had his color back and his voice back, and something else back too, something guarded, the iron coming up behind the eyes. He reached into his coat. "What do I owe you?" he said. It was not a thank you. It was a settling. It was 40 years of his father's law in 4 words. Marcus understood later that the man was not being cold. The man was being honest, in the only currency he believed in. A kindness had been done. It had a price. Pay it and walk away owing nothing and being owed nothing, and that way no one owns a piece of you. Marcus looked at the hand going into the coat, and he did the one thing that, over the next 6 years, would dismantle Theodore Banks more completely than grief had built him. He said, "You don't owe me anything. I bought 2 coffees and I only drank 1. He nodded at the cart. "You want the other one? It's just going to get cold up there. 6:15 tomorrow if you're around. The water's worth seeing when it turns." And he turned and walked up the hill to the bench and his second coffee and the river going gold, and he did not look back to see whether the old man got in his car, because in Marcus's understanding of the world he had not done anything. He had sat with someone at the worst part. That was the whole job. Everything else was keeping your hands busy. The next morning at 6:15 the old man was on the bench. He did not say thank you, he did not say his name. He brought the green thermos and he did not open it. He took the second coffee Marcus held out and let it go cold in his hands and drank, maybe 2 swallows. They sat. The water turned. After 11 minutes the old man said, looking at the freight terminal across the river, the cranes and the long low buildings and the line of barges, "My son worked the river." That was all. That was the whole of it. Marcus, who had learned in 16 years that the talking was never the point, did not ask which boat or how it ended or any of the 400 questions a lesser listener would have reached for. He looked at the same water and said, "My wife passed 4 winters ago. I come up here when I can't go home yet." 3 barges went by, pushed by a towboat, low in the water full of coal. A gull worked the wake. The old man said, "How long does it last, the not being able to go home?" And Marcus, 58, mop calluses on both hands, said the truest thing he knew, which was not comfort and did not pretend to be. "I'll tell you when it stops. So far it hasn't." He turned the paper cup a quarter turn in his hands. "But it gets so you can sit with it." He nodded at the bench, the slats, the cold seat between them. "That's about all I've got. You can sit with it. Better if you're not by yourself for the worst part." The old man did not answer, but his hands, which had been gripping the green thermos the way a man grips a railing, eased, just slightly, just enough that a person who spent his life watching hands in the dark would notice. They sat until the sun cleared the terminal cranes. Then the old man stood and set the half-finished coffee on the slat between them, careful, like it was more than $2, and walked down the hill to a plain dark car, and Marcus watched the water a while longer and then walked his 41 minutes home to the apartment at 64 degrees. And neither man knew that something had just been opened that 19 years and $2.4 billion had been built specifically to keep shut. That was how it started. That was how it went for 6 years. Not every morning. Marcus worked 5 nights and was off 2, and the old man came maybe 3 mornings a week, 4 in the cold months, almost never in high summer when the dawn came too early and too easy, and there was nothing to sit with it for. But on the mornings the old man came, Marcus had 2 coffees, and on the mornings the old man didn't. Marcus set the second cup on the empty slat anyway and let it go cold. Because he had bought it already, and because a thing you only do when someone is watching is not a thing you do, it is a thing you perform, and Marcus did not perform. They learned each other the way 2 men learn each other when neither one is allowed to ask. Marcus knew the old man had a son who had worked the river and was gone. He knew it from the 11 words on the second morning, and from the thermos, and from a silence that came up like a wall every March, and he never once pushed at the wall. The old man knew Marcus cleaned floors at a hospital, because Marcus said so, and that his wife had been Dora and had fed children for 29 years and sung the alto line on Sundays, and that he walked home to save the 2.75 cents. The old man asked few questions, and the questions he asked were small, and the small ones were the only ones that ever got answered, honestly, which was a thing it took Theodore Banks about 2 years on that bench to understand, that the weather was not small talk, that asking a man whether his knees hurt in the cold was, from a certain kind of man, the largest thing you could safely offer. Theodore did the math too, in his own way. It was what he was. In the first winter he had run the numbers on Marcus Bell the way he ran them on a barge company he was thinking of buying. 1540s an hour, 16 years on one floor, a re-soled pair of 39.9 shoes, a wife 4 winters dead, a coffee can he did not yet know about but suspected, because Theodore had spent 40 years learning to read what people did with the little they had. He had waited, the first year, for the ask. There is always an ask. He knew this the way he knew the current ran fastest at the bend below the landing. A man do you a kindness, you find out what it cost, because it cost, and the ones who say it's free are the most expensive of all. He waited for Marcus to learn who he was, or guess, and then to ask, because they always asked, the cousins and the charities and the men who shook his hand at the funeral and the woman from the symphony and his own brother-in-law. Everyone Theodore had ever met had eventually, gently, with great tact, gotten to the number they wanted from him. Marcus never got to a number. After the first year Theodore stopped waiting for it and could not understand why it did not come, and after the second year he stopped trying to understand and just came to the bench, and somewhere in the third year, on a morning he did not mark and would have denied, the wall he had built around the wound 19 years before developed, for the first time, the smallest hairline crack, because there was a man beside him at the worst part of the day, who did not, would not, ever, hold out a hand into a coat and ask what he was owed. The irony of it, which the river kept and told no one, was this. Every morning the 2 men sat on that bench and watched the freight terminal across the water come up gold in the dawn, the long low buildings and the cranes and the line of barges loading coal, and Marcus would sometimes nod at it and say, "That's a lot of work going on over there before most people are awake, the way you remark on weather." And Theodore would say, "It is," and look at the cranes a long moment, and not say that the name painted 40 feet wide on the side of the largest building, the name Marcus could not quite read at that distance in that light, was his own. That the 900 people clocking in over there worked for the old man on the bench. That the barge 2 men were re-rigging at the far dock, small as toys from the landing, rode a coupling system Theodore had personally redesigned the year after a coupling failed on a black March night and took his son into the water 3 miles below where they now sat. Marcus looked at the terminal 600 mornings and never knew. He looked across a river at a $2.4 billion company and saw a lot of work going on and turned his quarter cup of coffee in his hands, and the man who owned every bolt of it let him. There were near things. Once in the 4th year, Theodore's coat fell open reaching for the cold coffee, and Marcus saw the watch, an old steel thing, nothing flashy. But Marcus had cleaned enough rooms of enough kinds of people to know the difference between a $40 watch and a watch like that. And he looked at it half a second and then looked back at the water and said nothing, because it was none of his and because a man's wrist was his own business. Once the new overnight warming program came to Riverbend General, a quiet thing, cots and blankets and a heated intake room for the people the cold brought in before dawn, funded by a donor who asked for no name on the door, and Marcus mopped that new room proud of his hospital and never once connected the anonymous money to the old man who, 2 winters earlier, had asked him in the dark how a person past 70 could die of a 34-degree night, and had listened to the answer the way a man listens who is planning to do something with it. Once Marcus mentioned the funeral home on Route 51 and the $58 a month and the 31 months left, just as arithmetic, just as a thing that would end, and Theodore said nothing and remembered every digit. And then there was the morning that cracked the wall the rest of the way. It was a March, the 6th March, near the day, though Marcus did not know it was near any day. The water was running high and fast and brown, the way it ran in snowmelt, and the fog sat low so the terminal across the river was gone entirely, just a smear of light where the cranes should be. Theodore came up the hill, slower than usual. He sat. He held the green thermos in both hands, the way he always did, and Marcus held out the second coffee, and Theodore did not take it. He looked at the brown water tearing past in the fog, and he did not move for what Marcus, counting the way you count in a dying patient's room, made to be the better part of 2 minutes, a long time for a still man to be that still. Then Theodore Banks did a thing he had not done in 19 years in front of any living person. He unscrewed the cap of the dented green thermos. His hands were not steady. He held it open in his lap and looked down into it, into the empty dark of it, and Marcus saw the 2 filed letters on the base catch the gray light, E and B, and Theodore said, in a voice gone all the way back down to slurred and slow and far away, the voice of the first morning, the voice of a man losing heat from the center. He filed those himself, 14 years old, at a campsite I almost didn't take him to. He said every man should be able to find his own cup at a campfire in the dark, so he marked it. The fog moved on the water. A whole minute went by, a real one. Marcus did not ask the boy's name and did not ask what happened and did not reach for the old man's shoulder, though everything in 16 years of fourth-floor nights told him exactly where a hand would land. He set the second coffee down on the slat between them, careful, the way Theodore always set his, and he said, low and level, the way you say it to someone losing heat. You don't have to drink it. You just don't have to hold that by yourself this morning. And Theodore Banks, $2.4 billion, 900 employees, 40 years of his father's iron law that nobody give you nothing for free, sat on a green bench in the fog with his dead son's empty thermos open in his hands, and his shoulders came down, and his breath caught and went ragged, and for the first time since they pulled Elijah out of the river a half-mile below that very bench, the old man wept, not the way you would think a billionaire weeps, with no sound to it at all, just the shaking and the gray light and the water running by full of snowmelt, and gone too fast. Marcus sat with him, hands in his lap, the whole job. When it passed, and it did pass, the old man capped the thermos and wiped his face with the flat of one hand, businesslike, the iron coming back but not all the way again. He drank, for the first time in 6 years, the entire second of coffee down to the bottom of the cup. Then he stood, slower than ever, and looked at Marcus a long moment with something working behind the eyes that Marcus could not read, and he said, "You never asked me who I am." Marcus turned his empty cup a quarter turn. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know," he said. Didn't seem like the kind of thing a man asks. He nodded at the fog where the river was. "Some things you just sit next to." The old man nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he had been weighing for a long time, some final figure in a ledger only he could see. 6:15, he said, and went down the hill into the fog. That spring the mornings got warmer and the dawn came earlier and easier, the way it did every year, and the old man came less, the way he did every year, and Marcus thought nothing of it. He came back in the fall, the way he always came back when the cold gave a man something to sit with again. The last morning the old man came was a cold one, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, frost on the slats and the river smoking in the gray. He drank his whole coffee. He sat a long time. When he stood, he put a hand on the back of the bench, steadying, and looked at the freight terminal across the water coming up gold. And he said, not to Marcus exactly, more to the water, it was a good place to wait. Then he went down the hill slower than Marcus had ever seen him go, and he did not come the next morning, and he did not come the morning after that. And Marcus, who had learned in 16 years and 6 winters that you do not chase a proud man, and you do not ask the questions that have walls around them, went on buying 2 coffees and drinking one and setting the other on the slat where a nameplate had not yet been bolted, all through that winter and the spring and the long easy summer, and waited the way he had been taught, without making it into a thing that anybody could see. It would be 11 months and 41 days before he understood why the bench had gone empty. By then there would be 3 black cars on the river road, and a name in brass, and a great many people who had spent over a month trying to find a man who cleaned floors and asked nobody for anything. The second week of October, a Tuesday, the morning came up cold and clear, with the first real frost of the year on the grass at Hawthorne Landing, and Marcus Bell climbed the hill with 2 coffees, 2 tenths each, the way he had 1100 mornings before, and stopped at the top of the path because something on the bench caught the light. It was a small brass plate 4 inches by 2, bolted to the middle slat with 2 new screws. It had not been there 3 days ago. Marcus stood over it with a coffee in each hand and read it twice. Theodore Banks asked that this bench remain a bench. It was a good place to wait. He did not know the name. In 6 years he had never known the name. But the words under it were the last words the old man had said to him on a frost-covered Tuesday before Thanksgiving 11 months ago, said to the water more than to Marcus, and reading them now in brass with a stranger's name above them, Marcus felt the bottom go out of the morning, because there was only one reason a man's words ended up screwed to a bench in brass, and Marcus knew that reason from 16 years of fourth-floor nights. He set one coffee down on the empty slat the way he always did. His hand was not quite steady. He had just understood, standing there, that he had been bringing coffee for 11 months to a man he had been afraid to find out was already gone. That was when the car doors opened. There were 3 of them down on the river road, black, idling, and a woman was already coming up the path. 61 years old, silver hair pressed back neat under a good wool hat, a good gray coat, walking fast for the cold, and then slowing when she saw the 2 coffees, one in his hand and one on the bench, and her own face did something complicated. Behind her came 2 younger people with the careful posture of assistants and a man in a topcoat carrying a leather folder. The woman stopped 6 feet off. She had been crying recently and had stopped and meant to keep it stopped. Her name, she would tell him in a moment, was Renee Carter, and she had run Theodore Banks's office for 31 years. "Are you the man?" she said, and then could not finish it the way she had planned, and started over. "He wrote about a man who cleans floors at a hospital and brings 2 coffees to this bench at sunrise. He never had a last name for you. He only ever wrote down Marcus. We have been looking for 41 days. She glanced at the cup on the slat. "You still bring 2. Marcus said carefully, the way you confirm the worst to a family. "I bring 2. He nodded at the brass plate. "Is that him?" "That is him, Mr. Bell. But he is close," she breathed. "I need you to understand who you have been sitting with, because he never told you and he made all of us swear we never would, and now he is the one who sent me to find you." And standing on a frost-covered hill with a coffee going cold in his hand, Marcus Bell learned, in the flat, careful voice of a woman who had guarded the secret for 31 years, that the old man in the brown coat was Theodore Banks, 79 years old, that he was worth something north of $2.4 billion, that he had built it out of one rusted tugboat starting in 1971, and that the freight terminal across the river, the long low buildings and the cranes and the 900 people who clocked in before dawn, the one Marcus had remarked on 600 mornings as a lot of work going on over there, belonged to him. That the name on the side of the largest building, the name Marcus had never been able to read at that distance in that light, was Banks, 4 feet tall. Marcus looked across the river at the terminal coming up gold in the frost. He did not say anything for a while. A towboat was pushing 4 barges of coal upriver low and slow, the way they always were, the way Elijah had gone out on a black March night 19 years before to re-rig one and not come back. "He let me buy him coffee," Marcus said finally. $2 for 6 years. "Yes," said Renee Carter. Marcus turned the cup a quarter turn in his hand. There was a thing happening in his chest that he had not let happen in 4 years and 7 months. Not since a small plastic bag, and he was a man who knew exactly how long he could hold a thing off, and he could feel that he was at the end of it. The man in the topcoat opened the leather folder. Renee put a hand out without looking and made him close it again. "Not yet," she said. "Not like that." She looked at Marcus. "He had a stroke the morning after the last day he came here. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving. He has been 11 months going down a stair 1 step at a time. There is not much speech left and there is not much time, but there was a window when he could still write, and he wrote, and most of what he wrote was about a man on a bench, and the one thing he wanted, the only thing, before the rest of the speech went, was to find you." She stopped. "He kept a notebook for 19 years, since his son. I have read all of it now. I am going to tell you one line from it, Mr. Bell, and then I am going to ask you to get in the car." Marcus waited. The frost was melting where the sun hit the slats. "The line is this," said Renee Carter. "He wrote it in March, the spring after he met you, in the 3rd year. She had it by heart," he wrote. "There is a man at the river who buys me coffee, and has never once found out what I cost. My father was wrong. I have spent my whole life finding out what everything cost, and I have been poor the entire time." And Marcus Bell, who had sat with strangers at the worst part of their nights for 16 years, and had never once let them see him do it, who had buried a wife on a Saturday and gone back to work on the Monday, because the work was the only place he still knew what to do with his hands, stood on a hill over a river he had watched go gold 1,000 times, and his hands stopped knowing what to do, and the thing in his chest came up all the way, and for the first time since Dora, in front of a woman he had met 90 seconds ago, and 2 assistants and a lawyer with a folder, the man who sat with everyone wept because there had been no one allowed to sit with him. He set the second coffee down on the slat careful, the way the old man always said it, and he put one hand flat on the brass plate, on the cold of it, and he stayed like that, bent over the bench until it passed. Nobody said anything. The river went by full of coal. Then he straightened and wiped his face with the flat of one hand businesslike, and he said, "All right, take me to him." The car ride was 11 minutes. The place was not a hospital. It was a house on a hill above the city, big the way Marcus had never been inside of, and inside it had been turned into one quiet room with a hospital bed, and the kind of equipment Marcus had cleaned around for 16 years, and in the bed was the old man, smaller than the river had let him look, and the brown coat was gone, but on the table beside the bed, where another family might keep a Bible, was the dented green enamel thermos. E and B filed into the base, where it had sat for 11 months within reach of a hand that mostly could not reach anymore. Theodore Banks's eyes were open. They took a long time to find Marcus's face, the way they had on the very first morning in the cold, and when they found it, the whole ruin of the face changed. The mouth worked. The speech was mostly gone, Renee had said, and it was, but a man can get one or two things across with what is left, and what Theodore Banks got across, slow and slurred and far away, the voice of the first morning and the fog morning, and now the last, was 2 words, and the 2 words were, "You came." Marcus pulled the chair close and sat down with his hands in his lap. The whole job, the only job, 6:15. You know that. He looked at the thermos on the table and he reached over and turned it so the 2 letters caught the lamp the way the old man used to tilt it in the dawn. Your boy did good work, he said. Filed those clean, 14 years old, you told me. He nodded slowly. I've been holding your coffee for you. Whole place is closed up since you left. Water still turns gold. Crane's still going before light. He swallowed. It was a good place to wait, you were right about that. The old man's hand came off the blanket. 1 inch, 2 inches, all it could manage, and Marcus took it. And that was the part his mother had told him about 30 years ago, in a corner of a stranger's bedroom in Homewood. The part that was actually the whole thing, and he held the old man's hand at the worst part, so that the richest man most people in that city had never heard of was not at the end by himself. Marcus came back the next morning at 6:15, 'cause that was the time, and the morning after that. He did not bring the lawyer or the folder. He brought 2 coffees, and he set one on the table next to the green thermos, and he talked, low, about the river and the dip outside 412 and the frost on the slats, the same nothing he had talked for 6 years, because his mother had taught him the talking was never the point. On the 3rd morning the old man could not find his face anymore, and Marcus talked anyway. He had learned, 4 years and 7 months before, that you keep talking after they can no longer answer, because the answering had never been what it was for. The lawyer's folder waited 2 days, out of decency, and when it opened it was nothing Marcus expected, because Theodore Banks had spent his last clear months making sure it would not be. There was no check. Renee had warned them. He won't take a check. She had told the lawyer you'll insult him and lose him, and she was right. The first thing Marcus said when the man in the topcoat began to describe a personal bequest of a size that did not fit in Marcus's head was no. Flat, the same no he had given a hand going into a coat 6 years before. He did not want it. A man who has run the math of his own life out loud, his whole life, knows that money you did not earn sits on you like a debt. And Marcus had spent 16 years and 6 winters refusing to let the old man owe him a thing, and he was not going to let the dead man buy his way out of it now. So they did the thing Theodore had set up precisely because he knew Marcus would say no. He had not left Marcus money. He had left Marcus the work. In the spring, in the window when he could still write, Theodore Banks had taken the warming program he had been quietly funding at Riverbend General for years, the cots and the blankets and the heated intake room that Marcus had mopped with no idea whose money built it, and he had grown it into a chartered charitable trust, funded out of his estate, with one purpose: to keep the people the cold brought in before dawn from dying of a 34-degree night. He had read about elderly hypothermia, the way it starts well above freezing, the way the body stops shivering right when you would think it needs to most, the way a person can go quiet and content and slip under. And he had read all of it because a floor cleaner had explained it to him in the dark in the second winter, and he had listened the way a man listens who is planning to do something with it. And in the trust's papers, in language the lawyer read aloud twice because Marcus made him, Theodore had named the trustee. Not an honorary trustee, the working one. The one who decided where the money went, who hired and who answered for it, who would have to get up in the cold and do it. Marcus Bell, a janitor at $15.40 an hour, trustee of a fund larger than the building he cleaned. He has to say yes, Renee said quietly, watching Marcus's face do the math and arrive at the only place it could. He didn't leave you a gift, Mr. Bell. He left you a job. He said you'd take a job when you'd never take a gift. He said it was the last thing his father got wrong and the last thing he was going to fix. Marcus thought about the coffee can on top of his refrigerator, and the envelopes under the napkins, and the 420s in Race's locker, and a wife who fed children for 29 years and never once which ones. He thought about the line in the notebook. My father was wrong. He thought about sitting with people at the worst part so they were not by themselves, and how there were people every cold morning in that city, going under quiet and content with no one to sit with them at all. He took the job, not the money, the job. He kept his apartment at 64 degrees and he finished the $58 a month to the funeral home on Route 51s himself, all 31 of them, because that one was his, and the lawyer learned not to bring it up again. The one personal thing he accepted from the estate of Theodore Banks was the dented green enamel thermos with the two filed letters in the base, and he accepted it because Renee put it in his two hands and closed his fingers over it, and said the old man's actual written instruction was that the man who held his coffee should hold the cup. And Marcus understood that there are some things you take so the giving doesn't die with the giver. Theodore Banks lived 9 more days. On the 7th, a woman Marcus did not know arrived from another state and sat on the other side of the bed, and she was Elijah's mother, Theodore's wife, Verna, gone 19 years. Come back not because anyone made her, but because Renee had finally been allowed to call her, and the two of them, the wife and the floor cleaner, sat on either side of the old man through a night that Marcus knew the shape of better than anyone in the house, and somewhere in it the family that had spent 2 decades, pretending it had nothing left to lose, found out it still had this, the last of him, to lose together instead of alone. He went easy near dawn, which Marcus thought was about right. They put his name and his dates on the plate then, under the line that was already there, and they left the bench a bench, the way he asked. The trust did its quiet work, and the work spread the way Marcus ran it, which was the way Dora had run her trays and his mother had run her rounds, heavy where it was needed and never with a name on it. There are 19 benches now along the 3 rivers, in the wedges of city land where the old piers were torn out, each one with a small steel box bolted to the frame, weatherproof, that holds blankets and a card with a number to call, and each one, before dawn in the cold months, is a place a volunteer might be sitting with a thermos and 2 cups. The program is not named for Theodore Banks. Marcus would not allow it. The old man, he pointed out, had spent his whole life making sure nobody saw what he gave, and you do not honor a man by doing the one thing he refused to do. In the bylaws, in language a lawyer wrote because Marcus asked for it in exactly these words. The volunteers are trained to do one thing above the blankets and the number to call, and that thing is to sit with whoever they find, with their hands busy if it helps, so that the person is not by themselves at the worst part of the night. The blankets are policy, the sitting is the job. The heated intake room at Riverbend General has Marcus' old mop closet's worth of cots now, and a second one opened across town in the spring, in the basement of the church on the hill where Dora used to sit and where they had buried Theodore's father in a back pew suit 60 years before. The listener can start, who is 19 and was once the reason an unsigned envelope appeared under the napkins, volunteers 2 mornings a week before her shift. Reyes runs the east side benches. Workers come over from the freight terminal, Theodore's 900, in their company jackets with banks on the back, and sit on the benches their late boss's money built, and most of them have no idea that the old man who signed their checks is the reason there is a thermos and a second cup at all, which Marcus thinks the old man would have liked best of anything. Marcus still works the 4th floor 3 nights a week. The trust could have ended that, and he would not let it. He says you cannot run a thing about sitting with people at the worst part if you have forgotten how the floor feels at 3 in the morning. Estelle in 419 passed 2 winters ago with Marcus in the room and the windowsill very clean. He still mops 412 around the dip. The benches do what the old man built them to do. On a 31-degree morning, in the 2nd February of the trust, a volunteer named Priya, 24, a nursing student, came up on a bench on the North Shore at 5:50 a.m. and found a woman in 2 coats sitting too still, head not shivering, and she knew from the training Marcus wrote what the not shivering meant, and she did not pour the hot coffee in and did not let her stand up fast. And she sat with her under the cartman's heater for 40 minutes until the slow speech sped back up. The woman was 68. She had been out since 1 in the morning. Priya never learned her name because she had been trained not to need it. Marcus heard about it the way he heard about all of them in a 1-line report, and he read it twice, the way he had read the brass plate, because it was the same morning he had lived 19 years and a lifetime ago, happening again to 2 strangers, who would never know that an old man on a bench and the man who held his coffee were the reason either of them was warm. And every cold morning he is off. Before light, Marcus Bell climbs a hill at Hawthorne Landing with 2 coffees, 240 now, and sets one on the slab beside a brass plate and drinks the other and watches the water go from gray to gold and the cranes start up across the river. A lot of work going on over there before most people are awake. The green thermos rides in his coat. He does not open it. There is nothing in it. He just holds it, the way the old man did. And on the mornings the cold has put someone else on a bench down the row, he gets up and walks over and sits down next to them with the second cup and does not ask them who they are. So here is the thing: this story will not settle for you, and the old man would have wanted it left unsettled, because he ran the numbers on everything his whole life, and the one number he never got was this one. Theodore Banks died believing his father had been wrong, that the coffee had been free, that for 6 years a man had given him something and charged him nothing. But Marcus took the job and not the money, and the only thing he ever truly accepted was an empty cup with a dead boy's initials in the base, which is to say he charged the old man the highest price there is. He made him owe something he could never pay back, and the only way to settle a debt like that is to turn around and pay it to the next person in the dark, which is exactly what the old man's whole fortune is doing now, bench by bench, before light. So was the coffee ever really free? Or is the kind of kindness that asks for nothing actually the most expensive thing of all, the way Otis always said, because the only way to clear it is to spend the rest of your life passing it on? When someone gives you something you can never repay, who do you really owe? The person who gave it to you? Or the next stranger you find sitting alone before dawn in the cold? The water turns gold whether anyone is watching or not. So does the kindness you do when no one is. Both of them come back. You just don't get to choose when or to whom or whether you're still around to see it. This is a work of fiction. The people, the company, and the events are invented, and any resemblance to real persons or businesses is coincidental. Creator's note, Persona Switch voice. In tonight's story I keep coming back to. It's not the warm one, it's the one that scared me. An old man writes it in a notebook near the end. My father was wrong. I have spent my whole life finding out what everything cost, and I have been poor the entire time. I'm at the age where I keep my own ledgers now. What I'm owed, who never called back. The thing is, the more carefully I count, the smaller my life seems to get. I'm not sure I have this right, but I think the old man was poor because he was always pricing. If you're hearing this past midnight after a shift nobody clocked, maybe you've been counting too. Maybe you're sitting up with someone whose breathing keeps changing. I wrote this one for you. You don't owe the people you sit with. That's the part I keep getting wrong. I'll be back next week with another story about someone the world keeps walking past. Marcus and Theodore aren't real. The river is. And so is the line. It's the only thing I want you to keep tonight. My father was wrong. I have spent my whole life finding out what everything cost, and I have been poor the entire time. There's a line in tonight's story I keep coming back to. It's not the warm one. It's the one that scared me. An old man writes it in a notebook near the end. I have spent my whole life finding out what everything cost, and I have been poor the entire time. I'm at the age where I keep my own ledgers now. What I'm owed, who never called back. The thing is, the more carefully I count, the smaller my life seems to get. I'm not sure I have this right, but I think the old man was poor because he was always pricing. If you're hearing this past midnight after a shift nobody clocked, maybe you've been counting too. Maybe you're sitting up with someone whose breathing keeps changing. I wrote this one for you. You don't owe the people you sit with. That's the part I keep getting wrong. I'll be back next week with another story about someone the world keeps walking past. Marcus and Conrad aren't real. The river is. And so is the line. It's the only thing I want you to keep tonight. My father was wrong. I have spent my whole life finding out what everything cost, and I have been poor the entire time.